a loser commoner who got caught and was about to be executed by a bunch of nobles for being weak. One of the nobles tells him that he will grant his wish before taking his life. He asks the commoner boy to strike him with his best magic spell. However, his spell is so weak that it hardly causes any damage to the noble. The noble decides to end his misery and shoots a fireball back at him to show what real magic is. The boy is screaming in pain as the flames burn him to ashes, but he quickly smiles at the amazing magic of a noble. He wishes he had learned more about magic and mastered it while alive. The next moment, when his eyes open, he finds himself in an unfamiliar room surrounded by maids. He looks at his hands and realizes they are quite tiny. He then accidentally activates a magic spell that bursts through the roof of the castle immediately, surprising himself with how insanely strong his magic is even though he is just a toddler. A town carrier runs through the kingdom, announcing the birth of the 7th prince of the kingdom of Saloom, Prince Lloyd. As time passed, the 7th prince, Lloyd, grew up. He specialized in playing hide and seek with his maids, making them run out of breath. He just wanted to go read magic books, but Silpha, a maid, found the prince. It turned out that it was time for swordsmanship lessons. They engage in a sparring session at an incredibly fast pace, where they attack and counterattack faster than a man could blink. And on first glance, it looks like the prince was able to hold his own against Silpha, but Lloyd was a cheater. He copied Silpha's skills and movements with magic, but couldn't compensate for the physical and body shape differences. Lloyd then buffed magic into the sword to extend it and turned his body into floating in the air, but still failed. While Lloyd uses his levitation magic to surprise her from a different angle, he decides to take a boost from the fountain to finish the fight. But Silpha calmly blocks his sword before telling him that he is cheating and slams him to the ground and smacks him on the head. She's surprised he thought she wouldn't notice his cheating skills. However, she's amazed he was able to use 2 spells at once, which most court magicians can't even manage. While bathing the prince, the maids accidentally talked about the demon grimoire in the forbidden book in the basement of the castle. This attracted Lloyd. While they were struggling with each other to see who got to sleep with the prince, Lloyd, with a face full of excitement, quietly slipped away. At night, sure enough, Lloyd secretly hid and went to the basement. He broke the seal on the door and went in. He can't believe he never knew such an exciting section existed underground in the castle. Immediately, a demon emerges from the book, and he tells Lloyd he's impressed he was able to break the seal. Lloyd wonders who the demon is, and the demon introduces himself as Grimoire, and Lloyd realizes that he's the demon of the forbidden book. Grimoire tries to convince Lloyd to free him from the seal, and he offers to give him as much gold as he wants. But Lloyd isn't impressed with the demon's creation magic. He's disappointed Grimoire just molded some dust into gold. Grimoire becomes desperate, and he offers to teach Lloyd some ancient magic that has been lost to time. This time it made Lloyd excited with wide eyes. Lloyd didn't think much. He immediately unsealed it. But in response to his expectation, the demon played a trick and threw a destructive black lightning bolt, so powerful that the basement was about to collapse. He was ready to destroy the kingdom when the dust gets blasted away, as he notices a huge magical barrier in place that protected Lloyd from the destruction, as he honestly tells the monster that he has never seen this magic before. The demon is pissed by this, and he hits Lloyd with more powerful ancient magic spells, but none of them can penetrate through Lloyd's barrier. Lloyd is so fascinated by the magic that he decides to try it for himself. He takes the remnants from his barrier and holds them on his finger so he can observe their composition. Suddenly, Grimoire grows a second face and starts chanting destructive spells, but Lloyd tells him to stop and to show him his best defensive magic. Lloyd chants a spell and shoots a magic ball so strong that it basically turns the entire barrier into a lava pit, defeating the grimoire. Then Lloyd used magic to restore the ruined room, while the grimoire knelt on the ground and worshipped Lloyd as its master. The grimoire pledges his services to Lloyd, and he asks to serve as Lloyd's familiar. Lloyd immediately agrees, but Grimoire believes Lloyd sees him as a lab rat. Grimoire transforms into a little cute demon with the aim of buttering Lloyd up so he can take him down unawares. Lloyd invites him to jump into his coat and decides to use the opportunity to attach himself to Lloyd and take over his body. But as soon as he touches Lloyd, He's surprised by how powerful Lloyd's mana is. He decides to be obedient to Lloyd because he can't see himself taking control of him. The second prince, Albert, invited Lloyd to practice magic shooting. Albert was known as a prince of both literature and martial arts, with a high chance of succession. The next turn belongs to Lloyd, who walks up to the area but realizes that he needs to hide his true powers. So he intentionally decides to just clip all of the targets one by one with his fireball instead of hitting them in the middle. The old officials who followed all sneered, but Lloyd didn't care because the throne had no value to him. Albert tells everyone to follow him upstairs, but tells Lloyd to play and practice as much as he wants. Lloyd is overjoyed at this opportunity, as now he can truly use his magic to the fullest. He then turns towards Grimm and tells him that he wants to try his special magic where he used 2 different spells at once. The ultimate fiery ball and the violent water ball merged. The demon overloaded and foamed at the mouth. A earth-shattering move was created, shooting straight into the sky. On this side, Albert knew that Lloyd was pretending to miss. He planned to use Lloyd in the future as a sage, so his power would be stronger. At this time, the demon in Lloyd's hand was also terrified, because the sky had been shot through and the day had become night. The next day, Grimm brings the newspaper to show a picture of the hole in the sky on the front page. But Lloyd's attention is turned towards the article about an adventuring party gaining lots of loot inside of a dungeon. This makes him decide that he wants to go to a dungeon, so he takes out a piece of acorn and uses his magic to create an exact replica of himself, which mirrors everything that Lloyd does. After that, he takes Grimm back into his arm and flies off to find a dungeon. But it turns out that half of Grimm's soul is magically transmitted inside the clone back at the castle, so they can communicate. Lloyd stops for a while because he has no idea where the dungeon is. Suddenly, they notice a girl escaping from a group of orcs. They go to a mountaintop to observe, but to their amazement, the girl uses a specific breathing method to generate energy and bursts through the first couple of orcs, destroying them one by one before blasting the final orc with a Kai blast that Lloyd had only heard about in books. The girl immediately notices him and rushes up the mountain thinking that he is an enemy. But in that time, Lloyd uses his imitation magic to make himself look taller and older. The girl immediately fell in love at first sight and introduced herself as Tao, a B-rank warrior from another continent. Lloyd introduces himself as Robert and asks whether she knows the location of any dungeons, and to impress him, she agrees to party up with him. They go inside the dungeon, where she destroys any monster that comes in front of her, while Lloyd collects glowing rocks. At night, Lloyd was taught by Tao about Kai Gong, a type of combat technique. Before she finishes speaking, Lloyd already starts trying to copy her technique just by looking and manages to feel a new sort of energy inside him, which makes him really happy. Tao, seeing him like this, promised to teach him all the knowledge she knew about technique. Later, she brings him deeper into the dungeon, where a monster wolf attacks them, but she quickly kills it with her Kai blast. Lloyd is quite impressed by this, and they both move to the center of the room to finally see what's inside the chest. Tao said that this was a low-level dungeon, so there probably wasn't anything valuable in the chest. Suddenly, a dark slash swept across. Luckily, Lloyd pulled her out in time. A huge skeleton emerged from beneath the treasure chest. Lloyd curiously asks what kind of monster this is, but Tao lies, saying it's just a silly monster. Then she decides to use a blow and pushes Lloyd out, knowing that this blow could break a few of Lloyd's bones. But there's no other way, because if he stays, Lloyd might die. At this point, the Lick begins to attack, creating countless dark mirror shards flying towards Tao. She still doesn't understand why such a powerful Lick appears in this low-level dungeon. Meanwhile, Lloyd is still in the air, getting blasted away. While he wonders why Tao did this and uses his barrier ability to slow himself down, he looks at his hand and tries to talk to Grimm, only to realize that something went wrong as Grimm seems exhausted and tells Lloyd to come home as soon as possible. Back in the boss room, Tao is somehow managing to destroy and block all of the Lick's attacks, but has gotten severely injured in the process. She realizes that if this keeps up, there is no way she will be able to survive. Suddenly, The Lick begins to speak and tells Tao that her magic seems to be one of the lowest forms of magic and claims that he defeated and ate a Kai magic user once, and he tasted horrible. Lick asks her about Lloyd, claiming that there was something different about him as his reaction time was insanely good as he saw through the surprise attack. She takes a deep breath and starts attacking the monster and wants to prove to the demon that it was wrong to underestimate her technique, landing a barrage of hits while thinking about how she has been working her ass off and training every single day since she was 5 to reach the position she is. She pushes herself one last time and breaks through the barrier, only to find that the Lick has disappeared. She falls to the ground out of exhaustion while the Lick speaks up from behind, claiming that her strength is even weaker than the magic present in his single finger. He claims that she wasted his time and shoots a massive magical shard at her. Just when she thought it was finished, his shard broke into 100 pieces. As it turned out, Lloyd arrived at the last minute and saved Tao's life with his barrier. He praises her on her performance and promises to take over and finish the monster. The Lick begins chanting a spell, but before he can attack, Lloyd uses a Kai technique to swiftly run behind him. The Lick is taken aback by Lloyd's speed as he takes a deep breath and hangs upside down on the rocks, protected by his barriers, while the Lick attempts to land attack after attack, only to fail each time. At this moment, Lloyd was contemplating a method to combine Kai and magic. He inhaled deeply to fill his lungs and then combined it with rapid magic, enhancing the rotation speed of the Kai inside. Lloyd realizes that his barrier is blocking the flow of air, so he decides to break his own barrier. This pleasantly surprises the Lich, who immediately shoots a bunch of magic blasts at him. But Lloyd jumps away, dodging the attacks one by one. He finally gets the hang of it and merges his Kai with his mana to create an incredibly strong magic attack. He dodges some more attacks, before throwing the magic attack around him to destroy all of Lick's attacks, surprising both Tao and the monster. Lloyd is not done yet and creates some more magic razor blades and starts shooting them at the Lick, who tries to block his attacks. Lloyd starts making his blades thinner and sharper, cutting through the barrier alongside the Lick, destroying him once and for all. After that, they look through the treasure chest only to find an old knife inside. Lloyd expressed his intention to keep this knife. Tao agreed. Then the chest slowly sank into the ground. According to Tao, after the dungeon was cleared, everything would be buried by the ground. But Lloyd held onto the chest tightly, not letting it escape. He realized it seemed this chest was the core of the dungeon. Lloyd didn't expect to have caught the chest, but Tao was panicked and told them both to quickly run outside. Sure enough, after they both got out, the dungeon had turned into an empty plot of land. Lloyd instantly remembered that he needed to return. Then Lloyd flew away, but Tao forgot. She hadn't asked for contact information yet. Lloyd returned to the palace and discovered Grimoire's substitute laying flat on the ground. It turns out that Silpha wanted to train him, but she realized that he was much weaker than before, so she decided to train her all day long. Later that day, he shows Grim the knife he discovered in the dungeon. Claiming that it appears to have been enchanted by certain spells, he instantly grabs some water. It utilizes a specific spell to gradually remove all of the knife's magical enchantments. Grim informs him that magical enchantments are uncommon and difficult to perform, but Lloyd chooses to learn how to enchant weapons himself and purifies the water carrying the enchantment, only to discover that he requires oil, silver, and some weapons to practice. He asks his father for some coin, which he gladly provides, but Silpha informs Lloyd that she will give him some oil, only if he can score a hit on her. They begin sparring, and Lloyd does his best to match Silpha's talents, even using his acceleration method to emerge behind her before attempting an attack. Grim and Lloyd go into their secret dungeon, and then melt down all the silver coins before using the oil to imbue magic inside of them, creating a solution that can help them in enchantment. Albert instantly tells his guard to give him some weapons, and the guards lay down all of their weapons. Lloyd and Grim take the weapons down into the dungeons and start applying enchantments. However, the steel is not strong enough and breaks into hundreds of pieces. Lloyd refuses to accept failure and continues to attempt, breaking multiple weapons. Finally, he returns to Albert and reports that he was able to successfully enchant 50 of the 120 swords he received, while the rest broke. Albert is beyond surprised, as even the ranked enchanters only have a success rate of 10%. The knight thinks that he is lying about the enchantments and puts his sword back in his sheath. However, the sheath breaks in half in an instant. Albert is really impressed and asks Lloyd if he wants to go on a monster hunt with him. Lloyd eagerly agrees. The next morning, Albert and his party leave from the castle in a carriage. Suddenly, Silpha detected an ambush. It was the kobold monster with sharp magic equipment. Silpha immediately jumps off while the knights form a protective wall around the princes. Lloyd pretends to be surprised by the attack, but Grimm claims that he knew about the presence of these monsters ever since they entered the forest. A knight swung his sword and unfortunately cut the kobold in half. Even Lloyd and Albert widened their eyes, whose weapon is so sharp. The soldiers were chopping the beast like chopping vegetables while expressing their astonishment. Albert starts praising Lloyd for enchanting the swords, while Silpha also praises him while standing on top of a mountain made up of monster corpses. Suddenly, a stray kobold emerges and tries to attack Lloyd. But thankfully, Tao appears out of nowhere and kicks the monster away. She begins looking around for Lloyd since she suspects that someone is using Kai magic. But because Lloyd is in his child form, she is unable to figure it out. Silpha telling Tao to back off and not to touch Lloyd so casually. They were about to have a catfight when Albert saved the day by assuring Tao that she can accompany them to the lake if she wants. Out of fear of Tao searching for him, Lloyd sneaked into the tent to hide, only to find himself almost suffocated between two mountains. It turned out Silpha was changing clothes and even planned to sleep with him that night. Lloyd tried to turn away, only to be caught firmly between Silpha's thighs. When Tao opened the tent, he stumbled upon a scandalous scene. Subsequently, the two women began to argue loudly, much to the amusement of the soldiers who cheered them on. Immediately, there's a huge blast as a giant monster appears out of nowhere, making Lloyd really happy, as this is the first monster that he saw in a forest. The giant wolf immediately rushed to bite. Tao also helped these soldiers. At this time, Albert stood out and launching a flaming sphere attack, instantly burning the ferocious wolf with terrifying firepower. The soldiers hailed the prince as a hero, but he immediately credited this achievement to Lloyd, because it was his magically enhanced sword that made Albert's attacks so terrifyingly powerful. Grimm calls Lloyd and tells him that he just remembered that the chapel on top of the hill was used to trap a pretty strong demon a long time ago. The dead monster gets up once again, and a demon crawled out of the wolf's mouth and introduced himself as Pazuzu. He then commands a huge horde of monsters to kill every single person present here. The monsters immediately attack Albert and his party, who try to stand their ground, but to their surprise, their attacks are pretty useless because the beasts regenerate immediately. Grimm guessed that it was because Pazuzu had used a spell to change their nature to make the monsters think he was their parent and obey him. He even used magic to manipulate like a thread transmitting healing magic power. Suddenly, everyone feels a wave of dread as they realize that Silpha seems to be serious right now. Silpha cursed the demon as a monkey with a stink mouth. This pisses him off, and he tries to attack her. But to everyone's surprise, Silpha not only dodges the attack, but chops off all 4 limbs of the beast. Pazuzu becomes irritated by this and begins using all of his mana to regain the werewolf's limbs. Albert notices that the other monsters have stopped regenerating completely, implying that if Silpha continues to deliver damage to the main body, they would be able to defeat smaller monsters without allowing them to regenerate. Meanwhile, Grimm had finished teaching Lloyd the new magic, but unexpectedly, the flower that Lloyd created even had a fragrance. Then Silpha went to borrow a sword with magical enhancement from a soldier. Just holding a sword with the scent of the owner's magic made her start to get all wet. Pazuzu decides to play some mind games with her and starts running circles around Silpha, trying to confuse and provoke her, and it seems to be working as she gets mad with rage. Pazuzu takes advantage of this moment and jumps in to attack. However, Silpha appears in front of him while inside the beast's mouth. Then she slashed again with twin swords, cutting the wolf to pieces. She continued her destructive combo, slashing 4 more times, separating the demon from the wolf, slamming him down to the ground, shocking every single person around as they shake with fear. Silpha tells him to get ready to taste the cold touch of the sword that was enchanted by the boy who he threatened to kill. The demon was beaten so badly by Silpha, but strangely, the demon put its face down and smiled, which confused Silpha. On the other side, the soldiers were gradually subduing the monster and celebrating. Suddenly, the ground shook, and Silpha also trembled. It turned out that the demon was breathing something into the ground. Pazuzu gets up and stretches his wings, and he hits her straight in the face, blasting her off into the sea. The demon flies up and claims that whoever inhales the demonic gas loses all their strength and simply gets knocked out. Silpha tried to hold the sword down and keep herself awake. She didn't expect that this old demon's breath not only stinks, but also carries such a damn magic. The demon rushed to attack Silpha. Thankfully, Tao reaches just in time to block the attack for her. Tao asks Silpha whether she can stand up, but Silpha advises her to mind her own business, as she can handle it on her own before she falls over into the water unconscious. At that moment, Tao began to breathe unevenly, her body heating up, and the demon slithered behind her, asking softly, "Why haven't you fallen under my control yet?" Tao immediately lashed out with a kick, but the demon caught her move, grabbing her leg and lifting her abruptly. Pazuzu noticed she was using a unique breathing technique to keep the poison out. Pazuzu asked her, "Why don't you run away? Or perhaps you want to become my subordinate?" Tao got angry, claiming that she would never become a slave for someone as ugly as him. She jumps up and then uses one of her most powerful spells that he has blasted into the water. She needed to quickly adjust her breath. But as soon as she set foot on the ground, a mouth opened. Tao quickly used her own 2 hands to hold this mouth from collapsing. Pazuzu approached her. Then he opened his mouth and continued to pump out the dominating gas. Tao couldn't resist anymore. She had inhaled the gas. Tao said that she had felt that handsome guy right here, and he was shining like the sun. Pazuzu tells the dog to gulp her down, and the monster swallows her alive. He picks the unconscious body of Silpha out from the water, claiming that she killed a lot of her minions and will have to pay for that by becoming his minion herself. Meanwhile, Lloyd is still playing in the background and asks how he managed to control the monsters. Pazuzu gloats about how he killed the parents of these monsters while they were still pups and then used his magic smoke to take control over their bodies and make them follow him. He suddenly remembers that no one should be aware enough to speak, which scares him, and turns around to see Lloyd playing with one of the dogwolves. He asks Lloyd how he gets through his smoke so quickly. Pazuzu discovers Grim is a demon and asks if he is guarding the tiny kid, before mocking him for being a babysitter. This irritates Grim, but he knows Pazuzu won't see the light of day anyway. Pazuzu laughs and sends in his demon dogs to tear the kid apart. Lloyd starts fixing his mana output and uses it to create a warm and gentle bed of flowers. The puppy remembered his kind mother, remembered her kiss full of love. But very quickly Pazuzu felt something was wrong. All his monsters were happily rushing to Lloyd's arms. Then Lloyd told the wolf to spit her out. Lloyd covered Tao's body while she is sleeping. Pazuzu released a super extreme miasma and wanted to suppress that scent. However, all the dog wolves attack Pazuzu with incredible speed and start tearing him to shreds with their pack hunting techniques. Pazuzu was bitten several times, but he was really furious, grabbed the heads of 2 wolves, and smashed them together. He gets so pissed at them not following his orders that he goes down and starts kicking one of them in the body. Suddenly, the entire area goes dark as Lloyd uses his domain expansion, leading Pazuzu to stand like an idiot, frozen by fear. When Lloyd tries to trap him in a shield, he barely escapes. This confuses Pazuzu at first, but then he realizes that this isn't even a fight to Lloyd, and he is simply having fun and wants to trap him in a cage like a lab animal so that he can experiment with his strong magic on him. He starts escaping the area as fast as possible, while Lloyd keeps creating barriers, pinballing the demon all over the place. Pazuzu feels this is too much as he tries to run, but is captured in the end. The demon tries to leave, but he can't. Lloyd combines spells from all of the elements before multiplying them by 100 and deploying them with triple the intensity, completely blasting the demon inside the barrier for 30 straight minutes just to see how much damage he can take. After watching for a while, he finally releases the demon from the barrier, who looks completely withered and half dead as he stands in the air unmoving. The demon starts turning to ash while Lloyd realizes that everyone is starting to wake up, so he immediately runs away to avoid any suspicion. He meets up with Albert, and when Albert asks what happened to the demon, Lloyd lies that an incredible magician named Robert killed it and ran away. A few days later, Albert and his company return to the kingdom to much fanfare, where they are presented to the king, who congratulates them on their ability to stand up to such an immensely powerful monster. Albert claims there were two other people, Tao and the mystery magician Robert. Tao wanted to find Robert, so she entered the jungle and didn't return. Albert straightforwardly stated that he wanted the king to grant Lloyd the right to run for the throne. The king was quite pleased to hear this, but also asked Albert, "Isn't it that way you will have more competitors?" Albert boldly said this to find the best king for the kingdom. A talented child like Lloyd is also a very good choice. There is no reason to refuse him. The king immediately wanted to confirm with Lloyd about this. Lloyd immediately refused. Then he picked up his stick and ran out to the playground. His lively demeanor was quite something. Suddenly, a pure white dog rushed towards him. It turned out this wolf had followed Lloyd when he left the forest. Lloyd was very happy about this. That's all for now. If you want more, please subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next part.